Failbaddon the Armless. One of the most famous characters in all of 40k, and for all the wrong reasons. And we're going to be talking about him today. Bear you in mind that we are going to be talking about Failbaddon, not actually Ezekiel Abaddon, the first captain of the Sons of Horus and the Lunar Wolves. This will be the comedic take on his personality here, because there's actually a fair bit of lore surrounding why he ended up with that rather unfortunate yet extremely fitting nickname. A variant of which, by the way, you might also have heard Failbaddon the Armless. It really is just a perfect little combination, isn't it? Harmless and armless. It stems from the fact that his old model was, a bit overly ambitious, shall we say, for the miniature technology available at the time, and his arms, both of which either carried a massive claws with a pair of bolters mounted on the top, or his huge demon sword, were both really, really heavy, and refused to actually stay put on the model. A bit of a common problem back in the olden days of GW, where their oft laudable ambitions quite frequently outpaced their ability. As for his second, even less flattering nickname of the Harmless, well, that one's a bit of a longer story, and it is primarily due to the fact that Abaddon, like a frighteningly rapidly rising number of 40k characters, is the victim of the too many chefs in the kitchen syndrome, as either he or events immediately surrounding or pertinent to him have been rewritten now, 5 times? The original version, of course, in the Codexes, then the Eye of Terror campaign, then the Horus Heresy, then the Gathering Storm, and also, of course, Aaron, I am an enormous simp for Chaos Dembski Bowden, who also had a go at turning Abaddon to something other than an enormous, miserable failure. And yet, despite this multitude of Games Workshop attempts to rehabilitate his image, or possibly because of the constant retakes, Abaddon is still most commonly and fondly referred to today by 40k aficionados as a particularly flaccid fart. But let us, as always, roll the timeline all the way back to the beginning, shall we, and go over just how this train wreck occurred. Because initially, Abaddon the Despoiler was intended to be the big bad of the 40k universe, back in the dark days when the Horus Heresy was nothing more than a half-heard or glimpsed legend, when it was just a tabletop wargame with a bit of fluff to it. Abaddon resided in the Eye of Terror, and he launched countless massive black crusades into the Imperium in an effort to break through the Cadian Gate and once more wage war on the Imperium at large. And it sounded pretty good, didn't it? A bit of a hell trying to batter down the gates of heaven style of thing. An apocalyptic event that will surely bring ruin to all that is good. The problem started, however, when GW decided to be a little bit extra symbolic with things, and made it so that Abaddon had already launched 12 Black Crusades, and was currently working up to number 13. And now, the 13th Black Crusade is a pretty good title. It sounds scary. 13, the unlucky number. Surely this time everything will go to hell in a handbasket. Maybe, but it also means that he failed 12 times. Which makes the big bad a lot less intimidating. And you've also got to bear in mind, this is very old 40k lore here, 2nd edition. The universe just wasn't all that built up yet, and so despite the fact that we were told that, oh no, the 12 Crusades, they totally had different objectives, and they weren't just abject failures, we really didn't have all that much of a frame of reference, so to the majority of people it just looked like, well, 12 failed offensives. And to make matters worse, the Imperium back then was portrayed as way weaker and way more frail than it is today. Ironically, after Abaddon's eventual 13th retcon and victory, the Imperium now is stronger than it appeared in the 2nd edition. I mean, think about it. Right now, a Primarch, Reboot Gilliman, is leading legion-sized formations across the stars, even as the warp squirrel Belisarius Call is snapping entire legions into existence by pulling them out of his galaxy-spanning freezer, even as he is revitalizing entire dead worlds ravaged by the Tyranids with a handful of plant seed and some sage gardening advice. Seriously, in the 2nd edition, the Imperium was portrayed as a flailing, failing power. It was on the verge of defeat. It was always hanging right at the abyss. Any and all technological advancement was a dream within a dream, rather than today's 40k, and Abaddon was the genuine threat set to bust open the gates in the 13th Crusade and lay waste to the galaxy. And hey, his entire negative reputation, his 12 preceding failures, could all have been swept under the rug if only he nailed his 13th temper tantrum. And GW was set to make it happen in a grand event. Oh yes, you tadpoles out there won't remember this, but back in the day when GW gave a shit about their audience and their setting, they would actually hold grand events to decide the future of the 40k universe, or Warhammer on occasion as well, where they would hold tournaments under their own purview. They would collaborate with gaming clubs. They'd have internet scoreboards where you could send in your battle results. They'd work with their stores, and it was a huge old party. It was a really damn cool idea, but it did have some problems, which were, to be fair, difficult to predict for our naive selves all the way back in 2003. Now, this event, called the Eye of Terror campaign, which would see Abaddon sally forth from the Eye of Terror once more to finally put Cadia on its knees, had learned some lessons from a preceding Warhammer campaign, where they simply allowed anyone and everyone to send in their battle results, and they would kind of try to figure out a campaign narrative based on that. Instead, now they would use weighted events. They would have forums, they would have army leaderships, all kinds of cool stuff that would hopefully get rid of some of the problems of previous events. But here's the issue. If you've got halfway decent balance, which they did, and you have a large enough pool of results, and by God did they, then what you're going to end up with is the average. It's so goddamn obvious in hindsight, but, well, that is exactly what happened. The forces of order and the forces of chaos scored pretty much dead even, which left the campaign as a massive anticlimax. The Black Legion had indeed sallied forth from the Eye of Terror, Abbey at their heads, and then they'd been fought to a standstill by the rando-ass nobody mere mortals in the Cadian Guard, and Abbey and all of his friends were forced to dig in to World War I era trench fighting on Cadia, having achieved, in essence, diddly dick nothing. And this is what really cemented his reputation as Failbaddon the Harmless. It's at right about this point that if GW had been smart, they would have started cutting their losses. Because when a villain gets the reputation of being, well, sad and pathetic, they're no longer a villain, and rehabilitating them is basically hopeless. His failure is a part of his character now. It is a part of his very existence, and it is not going to go away no matter how many times you retcon him. In fact, retconning him at that point will only make things worse, because it will add further fuel to the fire. A delicious little touch, for example, is that one of Abaddon's special rules is called Dark fate. This gives him a 4+ invulnerability save because the gods won't let him die until he's fulfilled his dark fate. In other words, Abaddon, quite literally, has in-universe plot armor. It's one of those things that I'm sure whoever came up with that rule was like, oh, dark fate, man, that sounds gritty and brutal. But it's really, really stupid when you combine it with Abaddon's multitude of failures. Now, if GW again had been a bit clever about it, they would have gone, okay, all right. Abby has not really done all that well, but he's still the warlord of chaos. He's still got that premier position, and all right, he's got a dark fate. Well, what if we set up another arc? We start raising up a new villain from the beginning, do it slow, some novels, some hints here and there, give him a rise to power, and then have him defeat Abaddon. Now make it good, it's gotta be good. Abaddon needs a good send-off to rehabilitate him as much as possible, and then perhaps once he's been humiliated, defeated one last time, sympathetically, preferably, to try and wipe out again as much of the stain as possible, you can start hinting at some sort of return. But again, rehabilitating a villain once he's proved to be less villain and more hand towel is extraordinarily difficult and rarely worth it, because what actually happened? Well, Abaddon turned into a enormous joke. Now, the Hornet's Heresy, I actually think, did a all-right job with little old Abby. It introduced him as a bit of a brainless character, because all of the other characters have a bit of an evolution. They've got at least a little bit of a fall to darkness, even though I often criticize how bloody rapid it is. Horus goes from being one of the most noble of the Primarchs to flaying Erebus's face off whilst he's still alive, sitting in his brand new enormous throne room. And this happens over the course of like a year. And that's not even the worst of what he does. It's a bit 0 to 100, but Abaddon is even worse. He goes from in book 1 being a bit, violent, but he is still measured, he is still tempered, he is still honorable, to bloodthirsty, insane brute who can think of nothing but murder, kill, death, joy in one book. He gets no character evolution, and he even has, I'm not going to spoil it, but he has a pretty tragic little fate in one of the Siege of Terror books too, which I actually thought was a pretty damn good look for him, and maybe could have been an excellent opportunity to take some pointers for that, for the actual Abaddon, but again, not going to spoil that one, because it's actually reasonably good. So the Horus Heresy was pretty okay, but it's not going to help him in the current year timeline, especially because, again, his character arc was limited, shall we say. And then we've got the biggest mistake of them all, in my opinion, the Gathering Storm. I hate the Gathering Storm. I loathe it. Not just for being one of the most undercooked piece of lore evolution I have ever seen. Ever. It is ridiculous. It turns the entire universe upside down. When you go into the Gathering Storm, you're still in old school 40k. When you get out of the Gathering Storm, the Black Templars are cooperating with Eldar. Robert Gulliman is back, and he's got himself an Eldar waifu. Cadia has been blown up because Abaddon decided to ram a Blackstone fortress into it. And, oh, by the way, the reason why the Eye of Terror is the way it is because of magical bullshit Necron pylons who were toots there all along, you see. And Abaddon's great Keikakudori was to destroy all of these pylons before he attacked Cadia. Yes, you see, those other 12 attacks on Cadia, ruses, my boy. It's just so dumb. And the worst part of it all The piece de resistance, the finishing touch on the retardation, is the fact that all of these universe upending events take place over the course of some 30 pages of fluff. It is an instruction manual. Countless books have been written about 40k, and they decide to upend the entire universe in the same number of pages it takes to learn how to operate a microwave. The Gathering Storm. If it were an egg, it would be so undercooked that it wouldn't even be on the chicken's list of things to do next year. And crucially, the Gathering Storm did not rehabilitate Abaddon's reputation because it was so goddamn blatant. Not to mention, even in the Gathering Storm, Abaddon is about to lose yet again, and only kamikazing a Blackstone fortress, an incredibly valuable weapon, directly into Cadia, losing it in the process, does he finally win, quote unquote. In other words, Abaddon's final victory, his great redemption arc, has him throwing his toys out the window because he's about to lose the game once more. Just so happens that one of those toys hit Cadia. This, incidentally, also beautifully illustrates the problem of trying to rehabilitate a villain once he has been firmly fixed in the minds of the fans as a failure, because almost everything he does will seem faintly ridiculous in light of his history. Particularly the whole throwing a Blackstone fortress at Cadia part, because that was the only one he had left. There were only supposed to be 6 Blackstone fortresses in the entirety of 40k. Now, the Blackstone fortresses themselves were super weapons wished into existence by GW's need to have a plot point for their Battlefleet Gothic campaign. But hey, enormous space fortress things, that's cool, right? We can accept that, that's fair enough. Abaddon managed to take over 3 of these 6 by hacking their computers, basically. But then he swiftly started bungling stuff and had one of them taken back from him by the rallying Imperial forces, after which Abby once more decided to take his toys and go home, and entered the handy-dandy self-destruct codes he had also been given by the Hands of Plot Power, which destroyed the 3 Blackstone fortresses which remained in Imperial hands, plus the 4th they had taken back. Abby now had 2 Blackstone fortresses, except, he gave one away to Huron Blackheart because reasons. GW wants Huron to be a proper villain too, I suppose, and then threw the last one away by ramming it into Cadia. His grand plan, his 10,000 years of preparation, all came down to a kamikaze suicide crash. Not quite the 16-dimensional chess move that we've all been told that it totally was. Oh, and of course in modern-day 40k lore, after yet another few retcons, there turns out to have been 7 Blackstone fortresses, with another one just kind of appearing off somewhere in the galaxy, once more conveniently to be the setting of a GW spin-off game. That feel when the entire universe bends in on itself to appease some half-assed writer at corporate headquarters. And, of course, at the end of the day, even if we accept everything else, right? Abaddon had this all planned out. It was a part of his grand scheme. He destroyed Cadia. He'd planned to do so as well by kamikazing his flagship into it. If we accept all of this, we need to then look at the outcome. What happened? The galaxy was split in 2 by, the plot powers of the Eye of Terror, who totally does this now if you destroy the Necron pylons. Abaddon is still no closer to Terra. Robert Gilliman has been reawakened, the Space Marines are operating in Legion strength now, and the Emperor is causing miracles with his war powers, which have been strengthened immeasurably to the point that there are now rumors that he's beginning to move on the Golden Throne. Once more, Abaddon's grand victory seems to have benefited the Imperium far more than Chaos. Again, this loops me back to the problem with current edition versus second edition. In second edition, the Imperium was on the verge of annihilation. It was a de facto defeated entity, a corpse desperately clinging on to the last vestiges of glory and strength. Now, in modern 40k, it's led by Primarchs. We know Vulcan is out there bumbling about somewhere. There's constant rumors about other Primarchs returning. Gilliman is running the Imperium personally from Terra, banishing much of his administrative woes and stagnation, and of course, as always, the whoop squirrel Belisarius Cole. Before his introduction, every world destroyed by the Tyranids was permanently lost. Every planet scoured by exterminators, permanently lost. The Space Marine chapters were, well, they were withering on the vine. They were taking casualties quicker than they could replace them. They, just as the Imperium, were a dying entity. Now the worlds are being revitalized by Belisarius's green thumbs. The Space Marine chapters are being reinforced by tens of thousands Space Marines. And their weapons and equipment and vehicles have also been upgraded. Post Abaddon's 13th Black Crusade victory, the Imperium is stronger than ever before. And whilst I do not think there is any way to rehabilitate Abby at this point, he could, if nothing else, make for a pretty good heel. Have him be killed off by some up-and-coming warlord, or have Gilliman hunt him down and slay him, or maybe Marnus Kelgar. God knows that fake-ass, much-abused character deserves a little bit of spotlight. I mean, GW has already allowed him to be killed off in a bloody Marvel comic, so I feel really bad for him, honestly. Still, Abaddon is still again the big bad, theoretically, so having him get killed, well, it would be a satisfying thing for many a fan, and it would give a great deal of glory and laurels to whomever finally rid the 41st universe of little old Abby. And to be fair here, in Abaddon's defense, many of his failings are not necessarily his own, but rather the overarching style of writing that has been a problem with 40k for quite some time. I am vehemently against any sort of plot expansion to the 41st millennium's overarching storyline, because 40k simply has not been constructed with that idea in mind. It is an old universe. It has been fully explored for 10,000 plus years. The addition of new races is almost impossible unless you delve back into the lore and pull up something old and half forgotten. The Tau was the worst of the worst because they were simply just conjured into existence with the explanation that, oh yeah, I mean the Imperium's been here, but you know, they kind of forgot about it. And then the Tau had explosive technological growth because the buttholes in their faces made them really clever, I guess, somehow. Not to mention that stagnation is a core key part of 40k. The entire idea is that the Imperium is rotten from within and constantly besieged from without. It is a door about to break, a barrier moments before collapsing. That was the charm of it, the grim dark of it. Now, well, the door's been kicked in, but the house turns out to have been remarkably neat on the inside, actually. And because of the need to perpetuate the universe, the Imperium now has to be given the opportunity to fight back. They have to be given a legitimate opportunity to resist, and in turn, it is no longer the rotten Imperium. Now it is, well, beginning to be a fresh and vital force, rejuvenated by incredible reinforcements and being led by heroes of legends. By advancing the storyline, GW has managed to undermine a tremendous amount of what 40k once was. I mean, try to explain the grim dark to somebody today. You would have to lean back on minutiae to go like, oh yeah, living on a forge world really sucks, and people are in the guard for life, etc. But if you were to explain the storyline as it stands now, you'd have to be like, yeah, well, the Imperium is kind of being led by a demigod who's returned from the dead, and he's leading armies of hundreds of thousands of super soldiers, and there's a magic space wizard who's revitalizing entire dead worlds who were eaten barren by alien monsters. Oh, and by the way, the literal god of the Imperium is reawakening, and miracles and angels are appearing and shit. I see. On the very precipice of doom. Totally. And all of this stemming from GW's single-minded obsession to make old Abby less of a fuck-up. You have to laugh, I suppose. But there you have it. Failbaddon the Harmless. I might have to do a proper lore video on him at some time too, because I did kind of like his style and his arc, limited though it might be in the Horus Heresy. But modern day Abby is a shame, best forgotten. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.